Why would going on a walk, if you're stressed, be a healthy habit? So in response to a psychological or physical stress, the body will release cortisol. And what cortisol does is it increases the transcription of specific enzymes that are responsible for both releasing stored fuel and uptaking stored fuel into the cell to be used as energy. For example, we'll take stored triglycerides, which is how we store fat in fat cells, and break it down into free fatty acids and glycerol and release it into the bloodstream. We also increase the transcription of enzymes that will take glycogen, which is how we store glucose, break it down into glucose and release this glucose into our bloodstream. And finally, we'll take proteins, break them down into their individual amino acids, and release these into the bloodstream, where they can go to the liver and be turned into glucose. And when we do this in response to exercise, these available substrate are used to turn into energy to fuel the athletic endeavor. And given that we're eating protein, we'll make up for this amino acid loss by increasing protein synthesis after the workout. But let's say that this occurs due to a psychological stressor. The problem is we don't have any increased energy demand, so we just have all this fuel floating around in our bloodstream. And what's even worse is that we broke down these amino acids, but we can't turn glucose back into amino acids. So unless we do something to increase protein synthesis, we're at a net loss. But I think an even bigger issue is that we actually have a very high density of cortisol receptors on what are called visceral fat cells. Which means in response to cortisol, these fat cells will be extremely receptive to any of the incoming nutrients. And without getting too in-depth into the physiology, this is probably the last place that we're going to want to store fat. But in this scenario, this is typically where a lot of the available energy is going to be stored. So if we stay sedentary in response to a psychological stress, it won't technically cause you to gain weight, but you may redistribute the weight that you already have by slightly reducing your muscle mass and increasing the density of fat inside of areas that we typically would not want to be storing fat. But one of the most beautiful things about exercise is that we can actually use this available fuel to fuel the muscles in whatever exercise we're doing. Additionally, we get what's called non-insulin dependent glucose uptake. This is simply an increased level of glucose uptake at the level of the muscles that will only occur in response to some sort of exercise, and it is localized to the specific muscle. So, in effect, we can kind of combat some of the negative body composition changes that could occur to mental stress by simply just moving our body, maybe going for a walk. And what's even better about this is that we can take our mind off of whatever is stressing us, and then really take some time to think about the problem, which in the long run will likely help reduce any sort of cognitive stress. With that being said, this doesn't mean go do a very high intensity workout, because this will also increase cortisol levels. And piling stress on top of stress typically isn't the best idea. Which is why I started this off by saying that walking is probably one of the best ways to combat mental stress. Because not only is it low intensity, but it gives you time to actually think about the problem and maybe come up with a solution, or even realize that it's not as bad as you perceived it.